To me, government exists to do the greater good that the individual alone either won't do or can't do. Say that again. Government exists to do the greater good that the individual alone can't do or won't do. So the question comes down to this. What is policy and how does policy interplay with government? Policy reflects how we want to see the tool used. Policy reflects values, it reflects priorities, right? When you look at our government right now, what do you see in our government now? You see a set of values and you see a set of priorities that are being reflected in and by policy. Child separation on the border. That is a value system that those who are wielding the tool of government have about immigration, about them and they are using government through the means of policy to execute, to implement that value system and those priorities. So when we think about elections, elections are all about this. Whose values, whose priorities are going to be reflected through the institution of government? That's what elections are about. Whose values, whose priorities are going to be reflected in government through this thing that we call policy? Policy is about priorities. It's about values. So when you think about our society, you think about the things that we want to see in terms of economics. We think about law enforcement. We think about education. We think about housing. We think about immigration. We think about climate change. We think about all of these societal platforms and frameworks. Any change that you and I want to see, the change that we need to see, the means by which that change is implemented is first, if we show up at the polls. If we don't show up at the polls, we don't win. And if we don't win, we don't get to ensure our values and our priorities are the compass that's guiding government. 2016, many in our community took a purist approach toward Hillary Clinton because of what her husband did 30 years ago and some things she said 30 years ago. And they didn't understand whoever wins gets to make policy. And we've got this fool in the White House right now because we didn't show up at the polls. And the value systems that government is implementing is contrary to our value systems. So when we talk about policy, I want to reiterate this. Policy is irrelevant if you don't win elections. It's irrelevant because you can't implement it. So we think about economics for a moment, right? Right now, we all are sensitive and aware of the growing wealth gap that exists in America. That growing wealth gap, that's the direct result of 40 years of policy. That is a direct result of trickle-down economics implemented through a series of policies. Monetary policy, taxation policy. What just happened in 2017? Republicans got a chance to implement their values and their priorities when it comes to taxation, right? They don't want to pay to take care of the poor. They want to keep all of their money. They built it, they earned it in their minds, right? And what they do, the biggest tax giveaway in American history. Trillion and a half annual deficit. Annual deficit. Policy, priorities, values, implemented through the institution of government because they won elections. We think about law enforcement. We think about the criminalization of the black man. We think about the over prosecution of the rule of law. All of that is the direct result of policy made and shaped in Washington. We think about the challenges that we have in education in our communities, particularly in urban communities. I live here in the city of Allentown, right? And our school district is kicking out $65 million a year to charter schools. That's a direct result of policy, of values and priorities of the Republican Party being implemented through the framework, the tool, the instrument of government. Look at what's her name? That's the Secretary of Education, DeVoe.
Betsy DeVoe.
Yeah, she's one of the major advocates in the country for the privatization of education so that they can make money off it. Not that it can empower our kids, but all of it is the direct result of policy. You think about housing. There's a significant shortage in affordable housing in urban communities and growing here in the Lehigh Valley. Well, that was a direct result of a decision under the Reagan administration. And Mike, don't say it, but under the Reagan administration, when they made a conscious decision to take government out of funding housing. So all the challenges that you and I see in our community and we want to resolve, they are the result of policy. And if they are going to be changed, they are going to be changed by policy, by utilizing the instrument of government to reflect our values and our priorities. But we got to win elections in order for that to be done. The how has to do with how do we utilize the tools and the apparatus of government to actually get stuff done. I call it the inside game. And one of the things that concerns me the most is, particularly here locally in the Lehigh Valley, is we are getting a lot of community advocates elected and put into elected office. And that's great. The challenge, however, is they're not understanding how to transition from being an advocate to a legislator. Because the role of a legislator is to understand the apparatus, the tools, the functioning of government, to become a skilled expert in the tools of government, like a master carpenter using a hammer or saw, so that he can shape and influence the priorities and the values in government. That's an example. So when I was on the County Board of Commissioners, it was 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So we was outvoted on everything. 7-2. You needed 5 votes to get anything done. So even if we had an ideal, if we woke up and had an ideal about doing anything, we were already behind the 8 ball, right? So what I had to learn to do was, when you serve on a board of individuals, it's about consensus building. No one elected individual can get anything done. It's not about the individual. It's about the power that's invested in the institution. So whether it's city council, whether it's the school board, whether it's the state house, whether it's the county board of commissioners, that individual legislator has to have the ability, the skill to build consensus, to get people to invest in his vision and in his dream. Otherwise, he's just sitting there and he's not getting anything done. So to give you a classic example, and Mike, let me know when I run out of time. So to give you a classic example. So I looked at I was head of the Judiciary Committee in Lehigh County over the courts, prisons, judges, DA for 7 years. And I looked at the juvenile incarceration rate, because we had a juvenile detention center. We were paying $2.5 million a year for it. But since we were paying for it, and we were paying for its operations, nobody cared who was being put in there. And when I looked at the number of young juveniles, black and brown, that were being incarcerated, I said, okay, I can't come at this from the standpoint of, hey, this is moral improper, this is wrong, this is injustice against black and brown, because I knew nobody was trying to hear that. Was it right? Yes. Was it going to be an effective means to turn the levers of government? No. So here's what I did. I went to Ed Sweeney, who was a director of prisons, because every year he spent $39 million of taxpayer dollars, and we beat him up for 3 hours every year at budget time. So I went to Ed, I said, Ed, I got a way for you to save $2.5 million. He was like, what is it? I'm in. So I got his support, and I got the support of other legislators, Republicans, not because, hey, I sold them on the ideal that it is morally wrong to lock up all these black and brown kids. I sold them on the ideal we can save money. I'm still getting to my goal. I wasn't a purist. Hey, it got to be about the why. No, it's about the goal. It's about the outcome. And we shut down the operations of the Juvenile Detention Center. We saved $2.5 million a year. Now, here's how we changed the incarceration rate for juveniles, because it dropped. There was an article in the Morning Call last year. It dropped 65% in Lehigh County. Because now juvenile has to be incarcerated because we don't have our own facility. We've got to send him to another facility. And then sending him to another facility, you have to pay that facility $350 a day. When we had our own facility, a probation officer, because a young kid cussed him out, could say, you know, I'll lock your tail up for cussing me out. Now, when that young kid cussed the probation officer out, the probation officer had to justify to somebody, why are we going to spend $350 a day? Understanding the levers and tools of government to get to your goal and to get to your objective. Mike talked earlier about Cedar Brook Nursing Home. Most people in Lehigh County don't know that Cedar Brook, which is a 5-star facility, one of the best senior nursing facilities in the entire state. There's only like 3 nursing homes in the entire state that's 5-star. We have one in Lehigh County. And it's specifically created for people who in their senior years who have no resources. And my thinking was that our community doesn't take advantage of those resources and those opportunities. And so I was able to convince Tea Party Republicans to spend over $100 million to build a brand new Cedar Brook facility. How did I do it? Did I go to them and talk to them about the moral rightness of it? No. I went to the bond people. I got an understanding of what our debt service was as the county. We were going to be out of all long-term bond and capital debt in 7 years. I worked with bond counsel and finance to come up with a wraparound strategy so that as the debt service went down, we would take those monies, wrap those monies around the bond for the new facility. And then in 11 years, you have a brand new facility paid off, and you wouldn't have to raise taxes or ask the taxpayer for one more dollar. That's understanding how to utilize the wheels of government. What do we want government to do? How do we want government to reflect our values and our priorities? And then those who are fortunate enough to be elected to be inside of government, them having the knowledge and the wisdom and the humility to learn from people who know so that they can become skilled at utilizing government. Why do you think Republicans, why do you think Republicans show up at every election? It could be the presidential, it could be the mid-year elections, it could be the local elections. Republicans always turn out to vote. Why? Because we have this fallacy in our community. And the fallacy in our community says, oh man, the system works for white people. It don't work for us, it works for white people. Let me tell you this. I watch white people. White people can't show up and have the system work for them by default. Why do you think Republicans are so energized to show up at the polls and vote consistently? Because they understand he who wins elections gets the privilege and the power and the authority to wield the instrument of government to reflect their values. Doesn't just happen for them because they're white. We fought for 2 years to get support for a tax incentivized. It was the TIF tax incremental finance. I won't bore you with that. But here's the point I want to make. The developer was white. I watched this man for 2 years come down to Lehigh County every week for 2 years and work the process. He worked the process. He met with people. He took people to lunch. He took people to dinner. He worked the process. See, and when we don't get the policy outcomes from government that we want, we want to say it's because we're black. No, we're not working the process. We're not understanding policy and how to wield the instrument of government to get the policy outcomes we want. We've got to be engaged. White folks show up to be engaged. Republicans show up because they know we want a Supreme Court that reflects our values and our priorities. We want an economic policy that reflects our values, our priorities. We want a criminal justice policy that reflects our values, our priorities. And so they show up and they engage. And if you look around the country, Republicans control a significant number. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, in 39 states, they control the state legislature.
Yes.
In 39 states, because they're showing up on the off-year elections. Why? Because they know he who wins elections gets the opportunity to ensure that government reflects their values and their priorities.
Now,